For 27 years, forensic odontologist Heath Bishop has been haunted by the one case he could never solve, the disappearance of his own brother. In 1998, Corbin and his girlfriend Ilara vanished on a cross-country trip, leaving behind only their abandoned car and a bizarre collection of human teeth in a velvet bag. The official theory was a tragic accident in the desert, but Heath knew the teeth were the key, a sinister breadcrumb trail that the original investigators had failed to follow. This is a story about a silence that lasted nearly 3 decades, and the one clue that was so strange, no one knew how to listen to what it was saying. Before we unravel this mystery, if you appreciate stories about relentless searches for the truth, consider letting us know with a like. It truly helps us bring more of these cases to light. The glare from the overhead fluorescent lights in the lab was sterile and unforgiving, just like every other day for the past 2 decades of Heath Bishop's life. He adjusted the magnification on his microscope, looking at the dental records of a Jane Doe, his focus absolute. This lab, with its clean surfaces and the quiet hum of machinery, was his sanctuary and his prison. Every unidentified victim he helped name was a victory, but it was a hollow one. None of them were Corbin. On his desk, propped against a stack of textbooks, was a faded photograph from 1998. It showed 2 people squinting in the desert sun, leaning against a beat-up blue station wagon. The young man, his older brother Corbin, had his arm around a smiling sun-kissed girl, Ilara. They were 22 years old, full of the kind of easy confidence that comes with having your whole life ahead of you. It was the last picture ever taken of them. Heath had been just a teenager when they vanished. He remembered the frantic phone calls, the growing dread, and the eventual discovery of their abandoned car on a desolate stretch of road in Arizona. Their wallets and camping gear were gone, suggesting they'd left voluntarily. But in the glove compartment, investigators had found a small black velvet pouch, the kind you'd use for jewelry. Inside were 17 human teeth. The discovery was so bizarre that it overshadowed the entire case. The teeth were treated as a macabre prank, a strange piece of an unsolvable puzzle. The official theory settled on the most logical explanation. The young couple, unfamiliar with the harshness of the desert, had wandered off in search of help or adventure and succumbed to the elements. Their bodies were simply never found, swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape. But Heath never bought it. He knew his brother. Corbin was impulsive, yes, but he wasn't stupid. He was a good planner. And the teeth, they felt like a message, a dark piece of a story that no one was reading correctly. That single, unexplained clue had shaped the course of Heath's entire life. He'd gone to college, then dental school, then specialized in forensics, all driven by a singular, burning question. He had dedicated his career to the science of teeth, hoping that one day he would understand the science behind his brother's disappearance. His parents had passed away a few years ago, their hope fading with time, leaving Heath as the sole keeper of Corbin's memory, the only one left to carry the weight of not knowing. The catalyst came on a Tuesday afternoon, during a video conference about advancements in forensic science. A colleague from a European lab was presenting a new technique for extracting DNA from old and degraded samples. She talked about a new process, something about dentin matrix sequencing, explaining how they could now pull viable genetic profiles from samples once thought to be useless. As she spoke, Heath felt a jolt, a current of electricity that shot through him for the first time in years. The 17 teeth from Corbin's case were still sitting in an evidence locker at a sheriff's department in Arizona, untouched for 27 years. They were old, but they had been kept dry and protected from the elements. For the first time since 1998, a flicker of genuine hope ignited in his chest. This was it. It was a long shot, a desperate attempt to apply brand-new science to a fossil cold case. But it was the only shot he had. Within an hour, he was on the phone, calling in every favor he had earned over his long career. He spoke to the cold case detective now in charge of the file, a woman who knew him by reputation. He explained the new technology, the potential breakthrough. It took weeks of paperwork and legal wrangling, but he finally got approval. The small velvet pouch and its contents were carefully packaged and shipped overnight to his lab. When the package arrived, Heath handled it with the reverence of a holy relic. He laid the 17 teeth out on a sterile tray, a collection of molars, incisors, and canines, all yellowed with age. They were no longer just a bizarre clue. They were 17 chances. 17 potential voices that could finally tell him what happened to his brother. With trembling hands, he prepared the first sample, the silence of the lab amplifying the frantic beat of his own heart. The wait for the results began. The weeks that followed were agonizing. Heath found it nearly impossible to focus on his other work. Every ping of an incoming email made his heart leap. Finally, the day came. The lab tech handed him the file, her expression unreadable. The DNA was fragmented, just as he'd expected, but they had managed to extract partial genetic profiles from 12 of the 17 teeth. Heath immediately ran the profiles through every criminal and missing persons database he had access to. He waited, staring at the progress bar on his computer screen, feeling the same gut-wrenching anxiety he'd felt as a teenager waiting for news. The results came back. 0 matches. Not a single tooth belonged to a known criminal or a reported missing person. The disappointment was a physical blow. He leaned back in his chair, the sterile white of the lab suddenly feeling suffocating. If the teeth didn't belong to victims, then who were they? He felt the old, familiar despair creeping back in. But as he stared at the screen, another idea began to form, a more controversial and legally gray one. Public genealogy databases. People all over the country submitted their DNA to find long-lost relatives. It was a massive genetic library, and with a court order, he could legally search it. It was a long shot, but he had to try. More phone calls, more legal battles, but his reputation and the unique circumstances of the case were persuasive. He got the warrant. This time, when he ran the profiles, he got hits, not direct matches, but a web of distant connections. Third cousins, great-nieces, a scattered network of families spread across the American Southwest. He began to build a map, connecting the dots, and a disturbing picture started to emerge. The people whose teeth were in that bag all had one thing in common. They lived on the fringes of society. They were drifters, seasonal workers, people living in isolated, off-grid communities in the poorest parts of Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. They were the kind of people who could disappear without anyone noticing, without anyone to file a report. They were forgotten. Heath focused on the strongest genetic link, a third cousin match to a molar. This led him to a woman named Brenda, living in a small, dusty town in Nevada. He drove for 6 hours to meet her. Brenda was in her 50s, with tired eyes and a deep-seated suspicion of outsiders. Heath showed her his credentials and a photo of the tooth, explaining that he believed it belonged to a relative of hers. She stared at the photo for a long time before finally speaking. She told him about her uncle, Jasper Quinn. He was a handyman who drifted from town to town, following seasonal work. He'd had a bad toothache for years, she said, but could never afford a real dentist. Then she mentioned something that made the hairs on the back of Heath's neck stand up. She said that once or twice a year, a dentist in a van would pass through their community. He offered cheap dental work, fillings, even extractions, all for cash. No questions asked. He was the only form of health care many of these people ever saw. He pulled Jasper's bad tooth, she said. Jasper paid him $20. After that, we never saw Jasper again. Most folks figured he just drifted on to the next town. A dentist in a van. The phrase echoed in Heath's mind. He thanked Brenda and left, a new, urgent direction for his investigation solidifying. He spent the next month buried in archives, digging through old state licensing records from the 1990s. He was looking for a ghost. Finally, he found him. Dr. Alistair Croft, a dentist whose license had been revoked in 1997 for a string of malpractice suits and unethical conduct. According to the records, Croft had operated a licensed mobile clinic. His last known address was a post office box in Kingman, Arizona, right in the heart of the region where the teeth had originated. Heath realized Croft wasn't just pulling teeth. He was collecting them. But why? The question led him deeper into the darkness. He started cross-referencing Croft's last known route with old, unsolved death reports from the same period. He found a pattern. A dozen cases of men and women in their 40s and 50s, all living in remote areas, all found dead of supposed natural causes or accidents. Heart attacks, strokes. But they were all relatively healthy people, and in almost every case, the deceased had recently been visited by an unnamed itinerant health worker. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place when he tracked down the nephew of another man whose tooth was in the bag. The man told a story similar to Brenda's. His uncle had gone to the van dentist for a toothache. He came back pale and weak, and died of a heart attack a week later. But the nephew remembered something else. He'd seen his uncle changing his shirt a few days after the dental visit. There was a large, crude scar on his lower back, a scar he refused to talk about, a scar consistent with a kidney removal. The blood ran cold in Heath's veins. It wasn't just malpractice. It was something monstrous. Croft was using his mobile clinic as a front, a way to gain access to a vulnerable population. He wasn't a dentist. He was a predator, harvesting organs for the black market. The knowledge was sickening, but it also sharpened his focus. He finally understood the context of the teeth. But the biggest question remained. How did his brother and Alara fit into this? He pulled out the original 1998 case file, his hands shaking slightly. He looked at the evidence logs again, at the list of items found in the station wagon. Then he saw it, something he had overlooked for 27 years. A small notebook, Alara's photography log. She was a passionate photographer and meticulously catalogued every shot she took. The police had logged it, but seen no value in it. Heath found the last page. Her neat handwriting listed the final shots she'd planned to take on the day they disappeared. Abandoned gas station, Route 66. old mining camp near Oatman. And then, the final chilling entry. Dentist van with strange coolers. They hadn't just crossed paths with Croft. They had seen him, and Alara, ever the photographer, had raised her camera. They had captured evidence of his horrific enterprise, and for that, they had been silenced. Heath now knew what had happened. He just had to find the man responsible. Using decades-old DMV records and property tax databases, he began the painstaking process of tracking a ghost. He searched for Alistair Croft and came up with nothing. But then he searched for men of a similar age and background who had bought remote, isolated properties in the Mojave Desert shortly after 1998. After weeks of dead ends, he found one. A man named Silas Crane had paid cash for a small, dilapidated property with a few acres of land, miles from any town. The man had no digital footprint, no credit history, no life before 1998. He was a ghost. Heath knew in his gut that he had found him. He contacted the local sheriff's department, laying out his entire investigation, from the DNA results to the organ harvesting theory. The sheriff was skeptical, but agreed to stand by. But Heath had to go first. He had to see the face of the man who had taken his brother. He drove into the Mojave, the heat shimmering off the asphalt, the landscape as empty and vast as his life had felt for 27 years. He followed a dirt road to a rusted mailbox with the name Crane barely visible. At the end of the road was a small, ramshackle house, and parked behind it, covered in a dusty tarp, was the unmistakable shape of an old utility van. He got out of his car, his heart pounding against his ribs. An old, frail man emerged from the house, his back bent with age. He watched Heath approach with watery, suspicious eyes. "Can I help you?" the old man asked, his voice a dry rasp. Heath held up the faded photograph of Corbin and Alara. "I think you can," he said. "I want to talk to you about my brother." The man squinted at the photo, and for a second, his calm facade cracked. A flicker of something, fear, recognition, flashed in his eyes before he masked it. "Never seen them," he said, turning to go back inside. "I know who you are, Dr. Croft," Heath said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The man froze. He slowly turned back, his posture no longer frail but rigid with tension. The mask was gone. Heath was looking at the monster he had been hunting for his entire adult life. Croft's watery eyes hardened into chips of ice. "You should have left it alone," he rasped. He denied everything, of course. He claimed his name was Silas Crane, that he was just a retired old man. But Heath didn't back down. He laid out the evidence, piece by piece. The teeth, the DNA matches to Croft's former patients, the scar on the man's back, the photography log. "Alara took your picture, didn't she?" Heath pressed. "She saw you with those coolers. You couldn't let her show that film to anyone." It was when Heath mentioned the velvet pouch of teeth that Croft finally broke. A strange, bitter smile twisted his lips. "Impressive," he conceded. "I wondered if anyone would ever figure it out. The teeth were my records, a ledger, each one a transaction." The casual cruelty of his words stole the air from Heath's lungs. "You followed them," Heath said, his voice barely a whisper. "You ran them off the road." Croft nodded slowly. "They were smart kids, too curious for their own good. They saw me meeting a client. The girl had a camera. It was just bad luck for them. He went on to describe it all with a chilling detachment. He and an accomplice had followed them, forced their car down a hidden ravine, and ended their lives. He said he had buried their bodies right there on his property. As for the teeth, the pouch must have fallen from his medical bag into their car during the chaos as he staged the scene to look like they'd just abandoned it. It was a single, careless mistake in an otherwise meticulously planned crime. Just as Croft finished his story, the distant sound of sirens grew louder. The sheriff's department, alerted by Heath before he'd arrived, was closing in. Croft's eyes darted toward the road, a cornered animal looking for an escape that wasn't there. When the police cruisers pulled up the dirt road, he didn't resist. He was an old man, his crimes finally catching up to him after a lifetime of stolen years. The officers took him into custody, and a forensics team began the grim task of excavating the property. Hours later, under the harsh glare of portable floodlights, they found them. 2 skeletons, buried in a shallow grave not 50 yards from the house. Weeks later, after dental records confirmed what Heath already knew, he held a funeral. He buried his brother and Alara in a quiet cemetery overlooking the ocean, a world away from the desolate desert that had claimed them. He stood before their headstones, the 27-year-old weight on his shoulders finally gone. He had done it. He had given them justice, and, in doing so, had found a measure of peace for himself. The lab, which had once been his prison, now felt different. It was no longer a place of haunting, but a place of purpose. He had solved the case that defined him. For the first time, he felt he could finally heal, to live a life not solely dictated by the ghosts of the past. The silence was finally over. Heath's journey was driven by a personal promise that lasted for decades. Do you think a person can truly find peace after dedicating their entire life to avenging a past tragedy? Or does the obsession itself leave a scar that never fades? We spend a lot of time searching for these incredible stories of justice and resolution. If you'd like to join us on our next search for answers, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss what we uncover next.